When it comes to New Year journal setups, this is the one that I am always the most excited for. This is what I call my everyday journal, or everyday bullet journal, and for the start of 2025, I'm going with this A5 notebook from Archer & Olive, and the cover design certainly inspired the theme for today, so let's get into it. Normally when I start a new journal, I'm quite nervous. I don't want to mess up the first page, especially the nameplate, so oftentimes I try and avoid it and I don't do it first. This time I decided to be fearless and go in without any penciling in and slap my name down with a Tombow. That's because the theme that we're going with for this start of journal setup is very doodle in the margins of your notebook inspired. That meant a lot of scribbly text, ripped washi pieces, and sketchy and messy doodles. This is definitely not the kind of style that I would usually go with for a start of journal setup, so it was still a little bit daunting, but I decided to punch fear in the face and just go with it on the first page. As the nameplate page suggests, hi, I'm Jess. I'm a chemistry teacher turned full-time content creator who enjoys short walks to the fridge for Coke Zero, listening to music from the pop punk and emo bands from my childhood, and sharing lots of bullet journal ideas to help you be more creative and productive in your own journal. To make this inside cover not only decorative but also functional, I've included a little note down the bottom, which ideally would be a sticky note, but I wanted it to match the overall theme, so I went with just a regular memo pad paper, and I've washi taped that along the top so that I can easily remove it when this list gets full. That's because this one is going to be for a shopping list, so anytime I have an idea of something that I want to get at the shops, but it's not something that'll necessarily go on my regular grocery list, I can note that down here, which means that next time I go out to I don't know, my local stationery store, go to do some online shopping or anything like that, I can just glance over the list and make sure that I'm grabbing things that I've already said I need or want. In terms of timing though, the nameplate page took about 5 minutes. That time was certainly increased because I was very nervous about going in without pencil first. I didn't want to stuff up my name or something. And also doing all of the sketchy outlining, I was a little bit tentative to do that because messy is not usually my default, but it was very much a case of trust the process. I guess we could kind of say that's what the entire of this setup is like. For instance, on the layout we're setting up now, this one isn't actually the first dot grid page in the notebook, but instead I've turned to the first full spread to turn this left-hand side into a pocket. I think this is a great use for that first dot grid page, mainly because you usually have some glue at the binding, which kind of makes it hard to open up to and turn to anyway. So I'm just leaning into the fact that it's already stuck along one edge, and I'm going to be sticking it along the left-hand side and the bottom. Before that though, I did want to add some decoration, and this kind of pink oozing drip thing is something that I've used repeatedly in this setup as a decorative element. To make the pages look cohesive and kind of matchy-matchy, I do like to repeat elements like this. So I made sure to use the same color of pink pen that I'm going to be using for all the titles, doing that same kind of sketchy outline that I'll be using repeatedly as well, and also adding in those scribbly doodles of mainly stars, hearts, and little crosses. Every so often I do go and add a lightning bolt in as well, but because I find them a little harder to draw, I didn't use as many of those compared to the stars, hearts, and crosses. Because I want the pocket to only take up half of the page though, you can see I'm trimming away the top section of that page. Here I'm making sure that when I cut it away from the binding side, I'm not trimming too close to the binding. I don't want to compromise the structural integrity of my notebook. And then I just run double-sided tape along the bottom edge and then that left hand or outer edge. You can use washi tape and just kind of wrap it around the edges of the page. That's a good way to make it so that then you get the full use of the size in your pocket. But oftentimes I'm never storing anything in there that's actually so wide that I need the full width, so I'm not too fussed about just using a thin double-sided tape. To add a bit more decoration to this page though, I just went in with a film strip PET tape, which I just thought was still a somewhat minimal but effective way to fill up a large amount of space decoratively. That tape and any of the other materials I've used in the setup are linked in the description box below, along with discount codes at the places that I got them because we love savings. The pocket page took about 12.5 minutes to set up, and then we're onto the right hand side of the spread, and this is going to be what I'm calling a timeline layout. Now for most people when they're doing their journal setups, they work on a monthly basis. So you have all the pages for January, for February, etc. They follow the calendar months of the year, so you have 31 days in the first month, 28 in the second, or 29 depending on if it's a leap year. But I've just found that my mind doesn't work very well with those odd increments of time. I don't really have a very good appreciation for how I'm progressing through both each month and the year when each of those months starts on a different day and has a different number of days. Instead, what I started doing in 2024 is what I call cyclic planning. So this is where each of the quote months are actually called cycles, and those cycles have 28 days each, or 4 weeks. This means that when you get through 1 week, you're 25% of the way through your cycle. After 2 weeks, you're halfway through, so on and so forth. And I've structured my calendar so that I have 12 cycles per year. But if we do some quick math, 12 cycles of 4 weeks each only gives us 48 weeks, and there's 52 in a year, so what happens to the other 4? These are what I call reset weeks that happen at the end of each quarter. So effectively, each quarter ends up being 13 weeks, 12 of those being dedicated to the cycles, and that last one being a reset week where I can get cool, calm and collected for the quarter ahead. For 2024, this was really easy because we started the new year on a Monday, which is when my cycles start. I like Monday start calendars. But for 2025, things are going to be a little bit different because we're starting the new year on a Wednesday. That means that my first cycle for 2025 actually starts on the 30th of December. Now I know for some people that would give them the heebie-jeebies. They would not like that at all. And yes, even though it bothers me a little bit that I'm starting my new year technically before New Year's Day, I know that the benefits of working in these 4-week cycles really pays off for me. I have had such a better appreciation of the passage of time and not kind of just putting blinders on and working within each individual week because I'm working in these 4-week blocks. Also, having the reset weeks at the end of each of those quarters gives me some intentional time to reflect, reset, as said, get myself cool, calm, and collected for the quarter ahead. It effectively gives me that fresh slate feeling that is similar to New Year's, just a smaller version done at multiple points throughout the year. All that's good and well though, but what the heck is a timelines page? Well, effectively just to help myself out, so I know when each of those cycles starts and stops and moves on to the next one, I wanted to have a summary page for those date ranges. That's why on this page we mainly have 4 boxes, one for each of the quarters of the year, and then within those I have what each of the cycles are, so in terms of like, cycle 1, 2, and 3 for the quarter, what day does that cycle start, what day does it end, and also when is my reset week, which I'm actually calling an epilogue now to go with my life admin gamification, but we'll talk more about that in a second. Here though you can see I'm sticking a whole bunch of white sticker labels over the top of the dates that I've written in, mainly because I got the spacing of these wrong and it was just looking way too cramped. The left hand column was looking really spaced out, and then the columns that were for the start and end days were looking very squashed. I actually realized around the quarter 2 box that it was looking a little squashed, and I was like, nah, this is fine, I'll just keep on with it. But by the time I got to the quarter 3 box, I'm like, no, this is actually ridiculous. You're going to be wanting to use this for the entire next 6 months. Let's make it something that's actually kind of nice to look at. Using white sticker labels is one of my favorite ways to fix mistakes. The sticker labels are just a fair bit thinner than the paper I have in this notebook. So yes, I could have just taken the paper that I trimmed away when I made the pocket and stuck that into the layout, but that would have added more bulk to my journal compared to just using the sticker labels. Plus the sticker labels are sticky because they're sticker labels, which means they're a little bit easier to stick in. In terms of the theme that we're using for this start of journal setup, along with just being kind of messy, it is very much a more is more style of decoration, so I wanted to add in a lot of those sketchy doodles and pieces of washi tape and all of this to just fill in blank spaces. If you're the kind of person who doesn't usually like to do white space or finds it tricky, then this could be the kind of theme that you want to go with. Maybe not for a start of journal setup, but possibly for a monthly. The reason that I wanted to go with this theme is that I thought it matched the style of the notebook quite well, and I also thought it would be fun to do with my life admin gamification that I'm doing for 2025. The actual styling of the layout though was inspired by Wicked Awesome Arts over on Instagram. Holly is so super talented. She did an amazing job of her emo theme in her journal for September, so a lot of the styling and the elements that I've used have been inspired by her. If you liked the idea of setting up a pocket in your notebook but didn't really need to have a timelines page right next to it, then other things that you could use that right hand page for would be things like a year at a glance. You could set it up as a goals page that summarizes the things you want to achieve throughout the life of your journal, or you could use it as an intentions page, which is effectively just a place that you set out how you want to use this journal, what you want your journal's purpose to be. In terms of timing though, this timelines page came in at 31 minutes, with a good chunk of that time dedicated to the mistake fixing from putting things in not quite the right place. As said though, I would rather go in and just fix it up so it looks nice because I want to use this page, I want to come back to it, and if I don't like the way it looks, there is a chance that I I just ignore it. Flipping away from the super handy timeline reference though, and getting into a year at a glance layout. This one is a bit more typical for people and is something that you could put on the timelines page if you didn't want to use a timeline, but still wanted to have something useful next to that inside pocket. The year at a glance is just a handy reference that shows us what day of the week each day of the year falls on, and I also like to use mine as a reference for the week number. Those are the numbers that we have running down the right hand side of each of the calendars, just in that lighter grey text. Rather than giving myself a hand cramp and a half trying to write out all of the little numbers, I decided to instead use one of my free calendar printables. If you wanted to grab those for yourself, they are linked in the description box below. We have Monday start and Sunday start. We have single digit versus double digit for the numbers 1 through 9, a couple different font options with a white background versus black, for a total of 96 different variants because I have no chill, and also I hope that that means that everybody will have their perfect calendar option as a free printable. As said, that one's linked in the description box, so if you wanted to make your journal setup just a little bit easier, I would encourage you to use those ones. You'll have noticed on the timelines page, and again here, I'm also using some printed headers in this journal. For the main page titles in particular, I did want to do that Tombow brush lettering with the sketchy outlines, but when it came to the subheadings, or the ones that I have here in the black boxes, I really liked the idea of the punched lettering label maker style. I did used to have one of those label makers, but I never really used it, so I got rid of it. And of course now I have a setup where it would be very nice to have it. The nice part about making these headers yourself on the computer though, is that you can size them perfectly to fit in the spaces you have for them. So for instance, in this layout, that was having them be 4 centimeters across and 5 millimeters tall, so that they fit perfectly above the mini calendars. The lettering style that I used was just a free font download called GF Ordner Inverted, but I just found it by looking up punched label font on Google. When it came to doing the header for the page, rather than calling it year at a glance, I just decided to go with 2025 because it's kinda obvious that it's a year at a glance. At least to me, I don't really need to have the description in terms of the title. Along a similar train of thought, when we get onto the right hand side of the layout, rather than calling that a future log, I just write down coming up, because it'll be for events that are coming up in the months ahead. To decorate the title though, I just used a combination of the scribbly doodles along with the kind of scribbly lettering, and also some script washi. As said, this is very much a more is more kind of theme, so I wanted to fill in the white space without having to go and draw in too many doodles myself. The nice part about this text washi is that you can't really tell what any of the words say. I think it's all kind of gibberish anyway, but it means it isn't super distracting from the rest of the stuff on the page that is actually there to be functional rather than decorative. In terms of timing, the year at a glance page took 19 minutes though it would have taken longer if I had to write all the numbers in myself. And then we're over onto the right hand side for that future log. I typically don't actually refer to this one as a future log, I do very much just call it a coming up page, which is why I will end up titling it with the words coming up. But rather than sectioning this one out so that it has a box for each of the months of the year or the months that this journal will hold, I find that I often don't really have enough future events to warrant having that much space for each of the months of the year, and plus it can also be kind of hard to predict how much space you would need for each month. Instead, I like to go a little bit more simple with mine and just have 3 boxes, so one for quarter 1, January through March, one for quarter 2, April through June, and then a box at the bottom for anything beyond this. Oftentimes I don't have a lot of events that are scheduled over half a year in advance, so I don't really need to have a very large section for that, and I certainly didn't need to have sections for every single month from July through to December. I also find that I have a tendency to record future events in my Outlook calendar more than defaulting to my journal, but I'll normally drop things into my journal before they have a set time that they're happening. So for instance, if my friend is planning a party on the 1st of March, but they haven't actually told me the set time for that gathering, then I can drop it into my bullet journal just saying, hey, 1st of March, you've got something going on. Whereas when I put it into my Outlook calendar, I want to be able to confine that to just the times it's happening. So this becomes a good drop space for any of those kind of events. To go along with my scribbly lettering and scribbly doodles, you may have noticed that I'm also being a little bit scribbly with my box drawing. I don't often freehand the lines that would go around the outside of a box, so that was another aspect of the setup that was a little bit daunting, a little outside of my comfort zone, but doing them on the timeline page and also the coming up page, I was getting a bit more comfortable with it. Once you kind of just embrace the fact that the intention is to be a little scribbly and a little messy, it does make the setup go a bit faster. In terms of timing, this layout took 18.5 minutes to set up, but I do still have to go in and populate any of the events I know know are coming up for quarter 1 and 2 next year. We are going to have a separate video on the channel where I fully migrate into this notebook, so go and fill in the pages with all of my kind of like start of journal information, but that one's going to be part of Vlogmas, or the A Month of Planning video series we have coming up in December. In that one we have a video per day on the channel that's something related to journaling, productivity, getting cool, calm, collected for the new year. So if you wanted to make sure that you don't miss out on any of those videos, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We'd love to have you as part of the team. On this page though, what I'm setting up is a projects list. As part of my life admin gamification for 2025, I wanted to outline the different projects I have in different areas of my life and assign them certain amounts of points that completing them will earn me. If you hadn't heard about the life admin gamification that we're doing next year, this is effectively taking each of the areas of your life, considering the tasks that you want to do in those areas more often, and assigning points to them to help incentivize you to get things done. For me, it's very much a way to incentivize me to live a more balanced life. I'm very much the kind of person who defaults to doing work-related things and kind of neglects other things like my health and social connection time and fun and leisure. Each of the areas that I'm putting on this layout are related to some area outside of work. I've specifically named them to kind of tie in with this fantasy RPG theme that we've got for the gamification. So for instance, vitality instead of physical health, spirit instead of mental health, stewardship relates to caring for my home environment, insight relates to personal development, prosperity is for financial health, charisma is for social connections, and gaiety is for fun and leisure. I also have a section for other down here, just in case I want to have any projects that fall outside of that scope, but I'm hoping that I won't have too many in that category. As said, the main basis of the gamification is thinking about those smaller tasks or actions that I want to do repeatedly, tying them to certain point amounts, and then accumulating points across the year to level up my character, both in terms of like a character level and also skill levels. But this projects page is going to summarize some bigger ticket items that will be worth more points, things that I can complete and give myself a little bit of a point boost in whichever category that project falls under. For instance, if I have a physical health related project in vitality, I complete that, I get points towards my vitality skill level. This is another topic we are going to have a full video on that kind of explains it in more detail and has some resources for you if you want to play along as well. But of course, given the fact that this gamification is going to be a focus for me next year, I wanted to have some layouts in my start of journal setup dedicated to them. The projects list is one of those. This one took about 15.5 minutes to set up, but what I also wanted to have was a space to outline my rewards for leveling up. One of the ways that I'm hoping to incentivize myself to keep on top of this gamification and keep playing along is having different little prizes or presents that I get for achieving each of the levels in the different skill areas. On this first page here, I'm going to have the summaries for my character level, vitality, and spirit, or physical and mental health, and for each of those I'm having a space to record the prizes for the first 10 levels. I may have to review this if I manage to get beyond those 10 levels, though I haven't actually gone and put in how many points I need for each level yet, and I'm going to make sure that I scale those appropriately so I shouldn't be leveling up too quickly. I'm hoping to make the leveling system similar to what you'd get in a digital game, where you kind of achieve the first levels quite quickly as a little motivation boost, and then the steps between higher levels get a little bit more difficult as you level up. To follow along with the fact that there's going to be increased difficulty in getting to those higher levels, the prizes or rewards that I get for achieving those levels are also going to get more impressive as well. So maybe one of the prizes for the first levels is a favorite snack or a bubble tea or something, whereas for those higher up levels they could be something that's a little bit more impressive. I don't just have 3 areas though, so what I decided to do was turn this layout into a Dutch door. That way I only have to make the header once and I can see it from whichever way I've got the Dutch door turned. That means the entire next spread is also being dedicated to rewards, this time for the remaining categories on that projects page. So stewardship, insight, prosperity, charisma, and gaiety. But for the last one, instead of being for other, I wanted this one to be for initiative. This one will be a little bit special for the game because it won't have particular tasks that it's tied to. It won't be like, drank some water, this is good for vitality kind of a thing. It's more so about actually doing things when I notice they need doing. I'm the kind of person who will see that there's like, I don't know, clothes on the floor or something and go, oh, I should do that. And then walk away. Like, cool, when are we gonna do that? Often the answer is anywhere from tomorrow to 3 or 4 months from now. So the initiative category is just gonna be leveling up every time I do something when I notice it needs doing. Or anytime I have the thought to do a positive action and then actually do it, I will get points in that category. I will of course have to have ways to record the points that I'm accumulating. I'm planning on doing a combination of a digital layout on Excel and also in my journal, just depending on how quickly I'm accumulating points and how granular I want to get with my tasks. I want it to be a system that isn't hard for me to fill in or keep up with, but still incentivizes me to get these things done that I want to do. After figuring out what the tasks are and how many points are associated with them though, the hardest thing is going to be figuring out what I want to give myself as rewards. I'm not very good at rewarding myself for like accomplishing goals, completing projects, that kind of thing. Oftentimes I just see the accomplishment as reward enough, but I really want to lean into the idea of little treats for next year. If you have any ideas for things that I could use as rewards in any of the categories that we've talked about, please do let me know in the comments. I do need help with this. Plus it would also just be cool to hear about the ways that you reward yourself for a job well done, or a goal achieved, or anything like that. I am definitely going to be having double ups in these rewards. So for instance, all of the kind of smaller level ones, like maybe levels 1 through 3 depending, they'll all be pretty similar, but still something that feels like an accomplishment, so it incentivizes me to do the stuff I want to do. For the Dutch door this time, rather than removing the top section of the page, I just decided to stick it to the next spread. This not only keeps your journal's structural integrity a little bit safer, but it also means that if you're working with a journal that has gilding, you don't lose any of the gilded edges. My notebook doesn't have gilding, so it was more for the structural reason, and plus by putting the washi tape over the top of it to add that extra decoration, I'm also able to hide the line where we have one piece of paper stuck over the other. The washi tape was certainly one of the most time and labor intensive parts of this setup, just trying to trim it so it didn't cover over any of my headers or any of the drawn decoration, and I did notice that this one is certainly starting to lose its stickability. I have had it for a while, so that's not unexpected, but I guess it's just a friendly reminder to make sure that you're actually using your journaling supplies. I have a decent few tapes that I've had for quite a while that haven't been fully used up. I should probably go back and check in with them just to make sure that they're still actually usable in my journal. I'm very much the kind of person who low-key hoards their stationery supplies because I'm like, oh gosh, what if I use it here and then I find like a perfect use for it later on? No, just use the supplies. They will be happier because of it. In terms of timing though, the rewards layout took about 34 minutes to set up, and it makes sense that this one's a little bit longer because it's 3 pages, not just 1 or 2. Flipping over though, and we have a layout that I set up in my last journal, but one that I felt needed a little bit of a revamp. This is what I call my leisure dashboard, and it's one of those layouts where the main purpose is just to get me doing things other than work. Like actually honoring my rest time, having downtime to myself, doing fun things. This one I'll be separating into 4 sections across the spread. So on the left hand side, I'm gonna have a space to put in intentional leisure ideas. So things that I can do during my leisure time that are a little bit more mindful than just aimlessly scrolling my phone. And then underneath this, I wanted to have a space for date ideas. This is for me and my partner Vogel, so it could be like date days, date nights, activities that we want to do together to just have some fun in each other's company. On the right hand side though, over here I'm putting in a just for me section, which is effectively leisure and self-care activities that I want to do just for myself, and also a space that I'm calling letting go of. This is going to be a space to drop any of the tasks and activities that I've decided I don't really need to be the person who does them. I'm going to outsource them to someone else or something else, just so I can reclaim some of my time and be able to dedicate that to things that bring me more joy. At this stage I've only identified 2 main things that I can probably put on that list, but I want to make it more of a focus for next year and actually getting in considering what I could outsource to other people, because I am very much the kind of person who defaults to, it's cool, I'll just do it myself. And I only have so much time and energy. In terms of timing, the leisure dashboard was the layout that took the longest to set up, coming in at about 41 minutes. Given that the structure of the page is actually fairly simple, it's effectively just 4 boxes and some decoration, I think the parts that mainly made it take as long as it did would have been that side panel decoration with the pink drip, mainly because organic shapes are not something I'm super comfortable with drawing. I do like to take my time with them and they take me a little bit longer. And also when doing the washi tape around the headers, I wanted to make sure I didn't waste any. Even though I have had this washi tape for ages and I still have plenty of it left, I wanted to try and use as many of those little offcuts as I could within reason. I didn't want to use every single tiny scrap, because as the tape doesn't stick that well to the page, they do need to be larger pieces to have more surface area in contact with the page. With the pink drip and the tape combined though, it did take a little bit of time. We've talked about it in previous videos though, when it comes to my start of journal setup, I don't mind spending a decent amount of time on this. I do like for my monthly setups to be a little bit less time intensive. You know, when I'm doing my daily logs or weekly logs or anything like that, I don't want to spend all of my time journaling because I want my journal to help me do things, but my journal isn't just a productivity tool for me, it's also a creative outlet. So while I was setting this stuff up, I just had an audiobook on, I was enjoying that while I was setting up my layouts, just taking my time and having fun with it. I do wish that I had positioned the header a little bit better on this page. I think the gap between leisure and the plus is a little bit too big for my liking, but I do feel that this theme is all about embracing imperfection, so I'm trying not to let it get to me. On to the next layout though, and this one is for meal prepping. Now, meal prepping is not something that I do currently, at least I don't do it very well or very often, but for 2025 I want to make it a goal that I'm meal prepping things that are better for me, nutritionally. I want to try out new recipes and find healthy foods that I like, so I'm setting this layout up to help myself. This one was inspired by a layout that I saw so many moons ago, and of course I didn't save it in a place that was super appropriate, so when I came to do the planning for this setup, I could not find my inspiration picture. I spent a good 45 minutes to almost an hour searching through Pinterest and my Facebook saves and my computer folders, just trying to find the reference picture that I knew I'd seen, and it got to the point where I just posted on Instagram stories being like, yes, I did just spend a ridiculous amount of time trying to find a layout that I saw quite a while ago, mainly just to share my frustrations, not with any kind of expectation that anybody would know what I was talking about. But two very helpful people reached out and said, hey, I think I know what you're talking about. Here's a link to the image that I think you're talking about. Those ones with these pictures from Thea from Juilliard over on Reddit, and effectively they had aimed to do meal prep for breakfast and lunch for each week of the year with no meal double-ups. Now, I don't actually intend on doing no meal double-ups, and this one also doesn't span an entire year, it's only for 26 weeks, mainly because my journal's only going to last half a year, so might as well only set up the layout for half a year. But I think this really just shows the power of community. It's nice to be surrounded by people who are enthusiastic about the same things as you. Like, I saw these pictures in passing, couldn't remember where they were from, and then two practically strangers on the internet were like, hey, I got you, I know which layout this is, let me send you a link. If you are looking to be part of a journal enthusiast community, then I would love to invite you to ours. Our community is primarily over on Discord, where we share layout ideas, inspiration, troubleshoot when we're having issues in our journals, and also have monthly community hangouts to just journal and chill together. If that sounds like something you're interested in, then jump into the description box where we have a link to that space. In terms of the structure of the layout though, we just have two columns, one for breakfast and one for lunch, with a row for each of the weeks for the first half of the year. Within each of those, I'm going to write out what I was meal prepping, and then I also have a little color code to indicate the ones I'll probably use again, the ones that are favorites, the ones that I'm probably not going to bother making again, and any weeks where I didn't get around to meal prepping. I am hoping that there won't be too many of those weeks. I really do want this to be part of my regular routine, and I'll probably have some gamification tasks related to it to give myself points for doing it. That meal prep layout took about 25 minutes, and now we're onto the right hand side of the spread, and this is where I'm going to be dropping new recipes. As mentioned, I don't want to just be meal prepping, I also want to be trying to cook new foods. I actually really enjoy cooking and enjoy experimenting in the kitchen and stuff like that. I just don't do it very often. Again, with that idea of being very work focused, and it's like, oh yeah, putting all of my eggs in the work basket means that I just don't have the time, inclination, incentive to get into the kitchen at the end of the day. Thankfully, I do have a partner who also enjoys to cook, and he cooks most nights, but because I get enjoyment out of cooking, I wanted to have this as a space to incentivize me to do some more of it. One of the issues I found is that the title on this page was supposed to be new recipes, but with the size of lettering that I'm using, it just was not gonna fit. I did then decide to introduce a new element to the setup, and that's to use the same style lettering that I'd done for the subheaders for each of the different sections on the layouts, and just made it a little bit bigger to use in the page title. This is also something I had to do on some subsequent layouts because the titles were just going to be too big to fit into the space that I had for them, but because it's in the same lettering style that we were already using for those smaller subheaders, it doesn't feel out of place in the setup. I like it when the layouts in my setup are matchy-matchy, things kind of look like they are cohesive and belong together, and one of the ways we do that is by having these repeated elements from layout to layout, like using the same style of lettering, using the same colors, pieces of decoration, so on and so forth. In terms of the structure of the layout though, we just have the columns down the left hand side being for the type of meal, so B for breakfast, L for lunch, D for dinner, and S for snacks. I then have a space to write out what I'll actually be cooking, and along the right hand side I'll write down the date that I tried it. This page was one of the quicker ones to set up, coming in at 11 minutes, and then we're flipping on over to some schedule pages. I haven't used layouts like these previously in my journal, so I'm quite excited to set them up. And the first schedule page we're going to have is for what we typically call Bujo Wednesday. At the moment we're calling it Bujo Tuesday because it's been moved temporarily to Tuesdays, but this is just an opportunity for me and my friends to meet up in person, go to one of our houses, have dinner, and just do some journaling and chill together. Having this regular standing appointment with my friends is just a really nice way to actually connect with people, because as I work for myself, and by myself, I don't really see people very often unless I'm quite intentional about it. While this is a standing appointment, we have it every week, either on a Wednesday or a Tuesday. What I want to keep track of is whose house are we at and what are we having for dinner. In particular, when it comes to having them at my place, I want to make sure I'm not making the exact same thing for them every single time they come over. We primarily rotate between 3 houses, so mine, Rachel, and Scotty's, which means that I don't want to be feeding them the exact same meal every 3 weeks. Like, even though there's been a 3-week separation, it would be nice to venture out from just the same thing. I'm normally pretty good at this, so I'm not usually too worried, but I think it would also be nice to have a space to note down when people say they can't make it, because I'm not very good at remembering that. The way this one works though is that I have a column for the week number, which I do forget to fill in when I'm setting this page up, but I go back and fill it in after the fact. Then a column to say where we're going to be, so whose house are we at, another column to say what's for dinner, and then the columns along the right hand side just have the initials for anybody who could show up. So J for me, R for Rachel, S for Scotty, M for Monica, and E for Emily. Or technically everybody else. Emily doesn't often make it to Bujo Wednesday because she does live a little bit further away, but I wanted her to be included on here too. This was another layout that I used the enlarged subheader for part of the title, mainly because Bujo's schedule was not going to fit, and I also added a little bandits down the bottom because our group chat is called Bujo Bandits. This one took 14.5 minutes to set up, and then on the right hand side we have another schedule page, but this one is for family time. Because my parents have now moved back to New Zealand, it means that my immediate family is a lot more accessible for doing family gatherings. Whether it be a games night, barbecue, dinner, whatever else, I just want to record when we're meeting up and where we're meeting up, mainly to make sure we are meeting up. I'm not super good at keeping in touch with people, and I know that will not stand with my family now as they are back in the country, especially not my mum. She will not have it. So I wanted to have a layout dedicated to making sure that I'm keeping in touch with them. Either I'm going to theirs, they're coming to mine, maybe we're going to brother's house. So the layout of this one is fairly similar. We have a column for each of the week numbers, a nice large space to note down what's happening, and then the checklists on the side are H for home, or here, M for my brother, P for parents, and then O for out or other. Of course, this structure of layout doesn't have to be used for a family schedule. You could instead use it for a weekly challenge or focus, some kind of a memories log with a weekly highlight, or for any other information you want to record on a weekly basis across the lifetime of your journal, provided your journal is going to last you about 6 months like mine is. That is something that I try to be very mindful of when setting up these start of journal layouts. I'm not going to have this particular journal for the entire of the year, so there's not a lot of point in setting up yearly trackers and yearly collections, ones that do span the entire 365 days, because once I get to the mid-year point, I'm not going to be using this one anymore, and I'm not really going to be that incentivized to open it back up and fill things in. Instead, for those collections that I do want to keep for the entire of a year and have information across that, I have a separate journal called my yearly collections journal. We already have a setup video for that one on the channel, but in terms of timing, this layout took me about 20.5 minutes, that time definitely being a little bit longer than the Bujo page because of the pink drip border. On to the next spread, and on this one I'm going to be setting up my work release schedule. This is effectively just a summary that shows when my membership perks are coming out, when I'll have video releases, other posts, essentially just giving me a bird's eye view of when those things are coming out, and thus giving me more of an impression of where my work pinch points are going to be. I set up a layout like this in my last journal, or current journal I suppose, but one of the issues that I had with the layout was that I didn't have any numbers on the calendars. This meant that any time I wanted to figure out out when something was happening. I kind of had to count the days myself, which didn't make the layout quite as functional as it could have been. So on this one, I do make sure to go and number those little calendars. I opted to freehand all the lines so that they'd look a little bit wobbly, a little bit messy, just as another way to tie in with the theme. This is one of the things that I like to consider when I'm doing my setups. How can I use the elements outside of just typical decoration to support the overall theme that I'm going with? As we talked about before, this includes things like lettering styles and the color palette, but also includes whether or not I use borders on my boxes. And if I'm going to use borders, do I just do them in black? Do I use a ruler? What line thickness am I using? It might seem silly to put that much thought into ruling boxes, or in this case, not ruling boxes, but making these decisions is part of the creative enjoyment that I have with my journal. In terms of how this layout is actually going to be used though, obviously these calendar boxes are quite small, so I'm not going to be writing anything in them. Instead, I'm going to be using a series of dots that either have different colors or different symbols in them to indicate when things are happening. I'm going to be putting a key for those symbols and colors down the left-hand side, categorized into the different types of releases. So for instance, all of the membership perks, when will those be happening? Those ones will be colored because then it's easier to distinguish between them. We'll also have things like content releases for the channel, so whether that be YouTube videos or podcast episodes. We'll have a symbol that indicates my weekly newsletter, stuff for our book club, stuff for epic goals. And I always appreciate this layout for giving me that reminder of, yeah, you do have a lot going on, you don't need to add more to your plate. Down the right hand side of the layout though, that's just going to stay as decoration. I didn't need extra elements for the key, and I didn't have enough horizontal space to add in more calendars. Plus, as we talked about, this journal's only going to last me 6 months, so I only really need 6 months worth of content summarized here. This spread took about 39 minutes to set up, and I am so excited to get in and use the color code, use the little symbols and populate the calendar. As mentioned, we are going to have a separate video on the channel that shows that migration process, where I get into this journal, get into my yearly collections journal, and get them ready to go for the new year. So if you don't want to miss that one, make sure that you do subscribe to the channel. But flipping back so that we can flip through, I'm really chuffed with how this came together. At the start, I was so worried, like when I first put that pink Tombow down on the very first page, I'm like, oh my gosh, what have I done? Have I just ruined my new journal setup? As mentioned, being kind of messy and unstructured like this in my journal doesn't really come naturally to me, but I think I have married that messiness well with some of the structural elements that I typically use, so it's still going to feel comfortable to actually get in and utilize. As I mentioned while we were setting up though, this isn't my only journal that I'll be using for 2025. We also have what I call my yearly collections journal, which has some of those year-long trackers, year-long layouts, mainly so I don't have to set those layouts up again when we get to the mid-year point and transfer all of that data, because there are quite a few layouts in that one too. That video is worth checking out for more inspiration as you get set up for the new year, so click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.